Hello there. This video is about how I, as a UX researcher working in-house, work with other people in my company, from engineers to designers to product managers and even the marketing team. I'm Lindsay Lachelet, and I've been a UX researcher for about 10 years now. I've worked both in-house and consulting across all kinds of different verticals, and I created this channel to help other researchers do better research. Unsurprisingly, the team members that I work with the most are definitely the designers. They're most interested in usability testing results. So usually on the current site or possibly some designs that they've created, maybe a prototype, maybe a wireframe even. They're really interested in what issues are users having with the current site or the current app, and then what problems are they going to have with new designs, or confirming that the new designs solve the current problem with the current site or product. So that's the kind of results that I usually am communicating to designers, but it's not just about the research. I also work with them on design critiques, prioritizing features, that kind of a thing, to make sure that any little things that they may have forgotten from past research or that maybe weren't important enough at the time to report in the research may come up again. So for example, I work on a real estate website currently, and we've had some discussions recently around whether we should cluster the homes for sale or whether we should just show DOS on the screen. And we do happen to have research findings on that, but it hasn't been emphasized a lot, so it hasn't carried over. So they needed us as the researchers, to remember that we had done that research and that we had those findings to advise them on which way to go with a new design for our maps. It's important to me when I sit in on a design critique that I make it very clear if my recommendation is coming from actual research that I've heard, or if it's coming from my experiences just in UX over the last 10 years, or whether it's just my opinion. It's something that I happen to prefer more than another, or just like I like a particular aesthetic, or I prefer to have things built a certain way. So I try to make it clear when I'm in those critiques which place that recommendation is coming from, so that then the designer knows, okay, this is based on actual users of our product versus this is based on just users in general versus this is just kind of what Lindsay likes. The next closest relationship is usually with product managers, and they have questions to help them basically prioritize the roadmap of features or products that are coming out, usually in the next year, maybe going out 2 years or 3 years, things like that. And so their questions tend to be around how important is this particular feature to users, or do users want a feature that does X, Y, Z? And so I have to take those questions and really translate them into research questions, because if I just go out and ask people, do you want a feature that does X, Y, Z? Most people will definitely say yes, when we may build it and launch it and then nobody ever uses it because it doesn't really solve a particular pain point that they have, or a particular problem with the current product. So I have to turn that, do users want X, Y, Z, into what pain point does that feature solve, or what pain point do users have, and does that feature fall into solving any of those pain points, or have we heard anything from users talking about something like that kind of a thing. Or even sometimes, does the competitor that users use a lot have that feature? That also can be important. Or do they value that feature in the competitor who has it? That can sometimes come up in research. That can be one of the ways you can kind of get at the answer to that question. So this tends to be more of the generative research, more of the interviews, ethnographies, that kind of thing, which I find really fun. That's some of my favorite research. I love usability testing because you always find new stuff, but the generative research is where you find the really unexpected things, because you're asking such broad questions and people are also very different in ways that, I often underestimate even now, 10 years into this. Another team that I work with quite a lot is the data team, whether that's data analysts, sometimes it's data scientists, but that usually comes two ways. Either they come to me with kind of a weird number, like for example, time on site is up, but lead submissions are down, or conversion rates are down. And so they're sort of like, why are people hanging out on our site, but they're not doing the thing we want them to do on our site? And so those are the kind of questions that I can answer with qualitative research. And sometimes I'll see a behavior that I want to answer with quantitative research or sort of quantitative numbers. And so, for example, on our website, we had a user flow where people had to select a state at the top of it. But also at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of all our pages, there was a list of all the states that you could click on and go to sort of the state page. But that wasn't part of this particular flow. This was sort of an advanced search flow, and you had to select a state to get your results, basically. So it would take you to basically a filtered state page. And so I was watching a user, and I noticed that they were going back and forth between this advanced search page and the state page, but they were using the footer to do so. They weren't selecting a state at the top of the advanced search, but they had selected options further down. And so I suspected that there was some confusion going on there, where when we said, like, please select a state, they believed that clicking in the footer was selecting a state. And so I went to the analytics team and I said, hey, can you look at, clicks in the footer? Is it a lot higher on the advanced search page than it is on any other page? Because if it is, then we may need to tweak that design a little bit. And it turned out that it was. The footer clicks when people were on the advanced search page were much, 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 much higher. And so I just took that to the designers, and we were able to sort of figure out a quick solution for that. That had to do with sort of moving the error message and things like that. But basically, because I noticed it in a test, I was able to go and say, is this impacting a lot of people? Sometimes the severity of an issue you see just based on sort of what the person does, if they can't complete the task. But sometimes it might be something little, or it may be one person, you see one person do it. And so you're like, I'm not sure if a lot of people are doing it. And you really need that quantitative oomph behind your findings. And so the data analytics team can give that to you. They also, at a lot of places, will run the A/B tests. And so sometimes you'll get weird results with the A/B tests, or that, it just doesn't go the way that we think it will. And so qualitative research can help sort of answer those questions when that happens. Engineers will also sometimes come to me with questions directly. Usually that's around a feature that they're trying to implement that's a little bit difficult, and they can tweak it just a little bit to make it a lot easier to build, but they're not sure if that tweak is going to have a huge impact on the feature itself. These conversations often also involve the designer, but the designer sometimes won't know if that little tiny tweak is going to make a big difference. And so usually they'll come to me and kind of, see, and that usually we can dig into research that we've already done on the feature possibly, or on the design, and see, are there any comments that are just like a little more subtle than what we reported in the findings? Maybe the findings were, people love a map view, but then when you go one step deeper, there's a couple people who commented like, oh, I love the purple over the teal or whatever. And maybe purple is easier to put in a product. That was a terrible example. But yeah, so sometimes there'll just be like a little tiny tweak that the engineers want to make, and it's just easier to kind of come to me with the designer, or come to me even directly and just say like, hey, if we tweak this a little bit, is it going to totally mess up the user experience, or is it okay to make that change without having to create a whole new design, a whole new wireframe, a whole new sort of delivery, go through the whole delivery system just to fix that one thing. Another team that I tend to work with a lot, because I work for smaller tech companies, usually under 100 people is where I really like to be, is the marketing team, because they don't have a separate market researcher. They're just not that big. And a lot of the research that they're doing is really more around surveys and survey questions, either on the site or sometimes like they'll send out a survey. And that I'm usually helping them with how to word the survey question in such a way that it will sort of get them the actual answer that they're looking for, the actual data that they want, that they're going to take action on. So if they sort of aren't going to take an action based on that information, then we can usually cut the question out entirely and shorten the survey up, which is nice because sometimes these marketing surveys get very long. And then also just making sure that they've thought through all of the potential answers to the questions and have given people sort of either they've got a bucket for everyone or they've got the buckets they need, and then they have like an other or an I don't know, or I'm not sure kind of bucket for people who, don't fall into one of the others, or, sort of don't have that data right in front of them. If you don't give people sort of an I don't know for questions that aren't right in front of them, then they'll sometimes just abandon your survey. They won't even complete it at all. So it helps them both get good information, the kind of information that they really want, and then also helps with their abandonment rates on surveys and things like that. I have done a little bit of market research here and there, and it's definitely, I would say, not my strong suit. I had to do a lot of Googling to figure out how to, price a product. But that was certainly very interesting. And, there's definitely a lot of resources out there. And it's a related field for sure. The methodologies aren't quite the same. And, sort of some of the focus areas aren't exactly the same. Market research, I think, tends to look at, how do we get users to buy this, or how do we get people to purchase this thing, or what do they want? Whereas I think UX researchers are trying to more find the pain points and figure out, is this thing that we designed, does it work okay? But they're definitely sort of cousin jobs, if not siblings. And the last team that I work with is the HR team, doing employee experience research. I may do a whole video on this. Definitely drop a comment if you want to see it around doing employee experience research. But mainly it consists of both helping with the wording, again, similar to the marketing team, making sure that it's actionable, making sure that they're asking the questions that are going to get them what they really want to know. And then also really making sure that the data is anonymized when it gets reported, and hopefully anonymized when it's collected. And if it can't be anonymized when it's collected, then you have to really build up a relationship of trust with the employees when you're gathering that data so that they can sort of share their critiques, because that's often the most useful information. We want to know what's not working, what's going wrong, what do people not like, and that's the kind of stuff that can be difficult for them to report when it's an employee to another employee, when they know that information is going to go up to their own HR department. So that can be very important. So those are the teams that I work with regularly. If you have any questions about any other team members I may work with, maybe other researchers, or specific questions about any of those teams, designers, product managers, etc., definitely drop those in a comment down below. And if you'd like to see any other videos, please like and subscribe. Thanks.